Hey there, greetings everyone. Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we read the first full chapter of Sylvanas, and it told of how a young Sylvanas, the middle sister of three, um, watched her oldest sister, another famous windrunner, Illyria, kind of fail on her first mission, and she interfered. She showed herself to be really the more powerful, and I think history, or the future, I guess in this case, will tell that that's going to hold, because I believe Sylvanas is the most powerful of the three sisters. She also sees the birth of her baby brother, which I believe is going to end tragically. Stay a while and listen to Chapter 2 of Sylvanas as we continue the history of one of the most famous characters in Warcraft lore. Lord Southril sat, eyes wide, perfect physique nearly motionless as Lirath performed. Music to dance to, music to move the spirit, music to make the heart ache. Southril listened with a focus even Sylvanas could grudgingly admire. The entire Windrunner family had a deep appreciation for art. Their parents had instilled in them from a young age that a world without beauty was no world worth living in. Music, sculpture, poetry, and the tranquility and inspiration they brought was what Larissa and the Farstriders fought to protect, what their father defended at court. Sylvanas thought magic was useful, yes, but no display Grand Magister Bellavir had conjured could rival the simpler magic of artistic creation. And so the girls danced and sang as other children did, but Sylvanas's little lord's son, not so little and not any more, was a true prodigy, and everyone he played for was the better for hearing him. So we have jumped forward, obviously, some years. I know the elves live much longer than the other mortal races. I just don't know how fast they age. Second, Bellavir is also mentioned in the story we recently read. Word of Lirath's uncanny gift for music and song had reached beyond Windrunner Village and neighboring areas, all the way to the ears of the elegant, polished, impeccably tailored Lord Southril. I just made the connection that Windrunner Village is their village. Doiki. He was famous, or perhaps infamous, for his extravagant parties. He'd been skeptical as whether the youth really was as good as rumor had it, and Southril had mentioned the boy to Varath. Lirath's father had invited the Lord to come see for himself, and it was clear within moments that he, like all who heard Lirath perform, was captivated. Sylvanas was proud of who Lirath was growing up to be, but she was a bit sad to see the child yielding way to the adult. She leaned up against a doorway, smiling wistfully as she watched him perform, as she had done at least 1,000 times, and as 1,000 times before, Lirath astonished her. Sylvanas had been the first to remark that even before the baby could speak, Lirath was singing himself to sleep. "He is just making noises," Larissa had said. "The three of you did the same thing." "No, there's a melody," Sylvanas insisted, and there had been. As Lirath grew, Windrunner's Spire was often filled with his singing, and when he was introduced to instruments, he picked them up easily. A true Windrunner, he was driven to excel, practicing diligently. Once Sylvanas had noticed his lute strings were red. Lirath had played until his fingertips bled, but said not a word. Under Lord Southril's rapt gaze, Lirath played the flute and the lyre, the pipes and the flute, the mandolin and the harp, all with equal skill and equal power to touch the spirit. Then he placed the harp to the side and stood quietly for a moment. He raised his head and used Sylvanas's favorite instrument, his voice. By the light of the sun, children of the blood, our enemies are breaking through. Children of the blood, by the light, failing children of the blood, they are breaking through. O children of the blood, by the light of the sun, failing children of the blood, they are breaking through. O children of the blood, by the light of the sun, the sun. So, gotcha, I'm not going to sing for you guys. Maybe on another episode, but it's too hard to sing. Not that I have anything against letting people hear me butcher songs as badly as I butcher accents. It's too hard for me to catch a melody of what the song is supposed to be. But I wonder what this is. So just analyzing the poem real quick, if we want to take an aside for that. We're talking about the light of the sun and the children of the blood, which I think is interesting as the high elves are going to become the blood elves, and this is sort of foreshadowing that. And I see this one-liner, enemies are breaking through. They're breaking through. Lament of the Highborn, more than 10,000 years old, was revised after the Troll Wars and the breaking of the Amani Empire some 3 millennia ago. The Quel'Dorei had joined with the humans of Arathor and owed them much. The event was honored kingdom-wide with a ceremony and celebration every year. But rather than being a rousing song of triumph, this song focused on the tremendous loss of life that had been necessary to earn that victory. Sylvanas both loved and hated it when Lirath performed the piece solo. When the Windrunner children sang together, Sylvanas focused on the harmonies, holding emotions at bay, but when Lirath alone gave voice to the ancient song, his pure tenor soaring and then softening, it was as if he sang of a grief that had only just happened, of pain so fresh it still bled, and it always broke her, just a little bit. Again, we have that humanizing of Sylvanas. Scowling at herself, Sylvanas palmed the tears from her eyes, looking up just in time to see the great Lord Southrill, he of the jaded pallid and cynical drawl, tucking away his handkerchief. He composed his handsome features as he rose to his feet, applauding. "Well done, young fellow, well done indeed." To Varath he said, "I confess, I was doubtful the praise being heaped upon the boy's fair head was accurate. Usually, musicians of his caliber are much older and found only in Silvermoon. But I must say, Varath, your family does seem to have an inordinate number of talents and skills. You, of course, the Ranger General, Illyria, and now young Lirath." Sylvanas and Varisa exchanged annoyed glances. They might as well not have existed. Then again, Sylvanas had no need for, or indeed no interest in, Southrill's favor. "I would be delighted to host a salon at my little country haven at his debut," said the noble was saying. "A few select distinguished individuals, small and private, tasteful." He paused, then added with a glance at Varisa and Sylvanas, "Of course the family is welcome to attend." 3 days later, Sylvanas found herself wearing a simple dress that Southrill's latest ladylove, the heiress Elisara Sunstriker, had witheringly pronounced charmingly rustic. Considering how many had complimented Sylvanas by the time Elisara gave her unsolicited opinion, Sylvanas allowed herself to enjoy the other woman's jealousy. Now she leaned idly against a tree at Southrill's haven as Lirath performed for the select distinguished individuals the Lord had mentioned. Normally Sylvanas was happy to surrender the enchantment Lirath wove, but tonight she was observing the observers of surrender to it. It amused her how self-important they were, each one believing themselves unique when in reality they were all exactly alike, clad in sumptuous clothing, wearing arrogant expressions, making comments that were civil on the surface but sharp enough to wound, and yet Virath, common sense, kind, and Sylvanas had to admit long-suffering, moved comfortably through the gathering. He stopped to congratulate one on the birth of a child, another on an award, still another for an elevation to a higher station, and others for their stunning wardrobes. How does he do it, she wondered. Magisters had nothing on the kind of magic her father wielded. No wonder he had limitless patience with his lively brood. Things moved quickly after the event, and Lirath was soon performing regularly at Southrill's soirees. He became almost more of a draw than the parties themselves. 6 months following Lirath's debut, he returned to Windrunner Spire from Southrill's haven, looking both stunned and excited. "There's my Lady Moon," he called up to Sylvanas as she stood waving at him from one of the balconies. "And there's my little Lord's son," she called back. Come down, I have something to tell you." Sylvanas hastened to meet him, a little worried at how flushed he was and how quickly he was breathing. "Are you well?" she asked. "I have never been better. Oh, Lady Moon, Southrill wants me to perform before Prince Kael'thas." Now it was Sylvanas' turn to be shocked and delighted. Kael'thas Sunstrider spent most of his time in Dalaran, the Magi city. Only rarely did he venture home. She flung her arms around her baby brother, noticing for the first time that he was now as tall as she, feeling his frame slim as a willow as she hugged him, both of them laughing. "You are far and away the best of us, you know," Sylvanas said as she drew back and mussed his hair. Lirath flushed again. "I don't think so at all. I am honored and excited, but it's just music." Oh, yes. Oh, my, and it's just Prince Kael'thas, she said, feigning boredom. Even father has to make an appointment to meet with the prince when he is in Silvermoon, and now he's coming to see you perform. The blood abruptly drained from his face. Oh, he said. Oh, what is it? What's wrong? Sylvanas, what if I'm awful? You won't be. You will captivate him just like you do everyone else. But I've never. Mother and father will be there to cheer you on. He relaxed a little but didn't look entirely reassured. Oh, good. Still, how can you be sure I won't mess it up? Because, Sylvanas replied, do you think that Southro would have invited Kael'thas, who is hardly ever here, to a performance if he thought you would embarrass him? He laughed at that and the tension bled out of him. I cannot argue with you. You always win anyway. Of course I do, little Lord's son. Always remember that. What do you mean you're not going? Sylvanas' voice was sharp and angry. Larissa frowned at the tone. Your father and I must always put duty before pleasure. Lirath is younger than you, and he understands. Of course I do, mother, Lirath said. His voice was calm and pleasant as always, and he wore a smile. Sylvanas, though, knew him better than anyone, and she could see by the tense way he held himself that he was greatly disappointed. Lirath had been summoned by Anastarian a few hours ago for urgent business, sending a courier shortly afterward to let the family know the king would likely have need of him well into the evening. Now, right before Lirath was to leave for Lord Southrill's haven, Halduran Brightwing had arrived to inform the Ranger General that there might be trouble brewing near Troll territory. Then let Illyria go at least, Sylvanas said. She was already distressed that she and Verisa were deemed too young to attend unaccompanied. Someone from the family should be there. Illyria is my heir, Larissa said with an exaggerated patience. She will assume the mantle of Ranger General in my absence. She must remain here to rouse the rest of the Farstriders in case they are needed. Larissa spoke as if Illyria were not even present, even though all four of the children stood together at the base of Windrunner's spire. The eldest child had a neutral expression, her arms crossed in front of her chest, but her eyes were cold. Sylvanas shot a glare at Halduran Brightwing, who gave a small, helpless shrug. It wasn't fair. Usually Lorthamar Theron stepped in for Larissa unless a threat was imminent, but he had already left for Southrill's party. Lirath was nervous despite his brave face, and a family member in the crowd would have comforted him. My lady, Halduran said, we should go. Of course, Larissa swung onto her dragon hawk. She looked back at Lirath and her expression softened. I regret that the day has taken this turn. Your father and I would both be there otherwise. I know, Lirath said, but he didn't meet his mother's eyes. Please be safe. Always, Larissa said. Then she hesitated and added, I know you will do us proud, my son. Her normally hard face melted into a genuine smile, and then her dragonhawk sprang into the air and she was gone. Illyria sighed. Come on, she said to her siblings. Sylvanas and Lirath remained where they stood, but Verisa, looking anxiously from Illyria to the others, turned to accompany Illyria back to the spire. Sylvanas was silent, watching after her mother until she disappeared from view. I am so sorry, little Lord's son, she said quietly. It's all right. You know there will be other opportunities, yes? There would be, but who knew when next Kael'thas would even be in Quel'Thalas? It could be years. She turned to look at him. You are certain to impress the prince. I have every faith that your next performance will be held with the whole royal court in attendance. No, really, Lady Moon, it's all right. Our parents have more important things to do than sit and watch me play. Lirath's voice was threaded with resigned pain, and Sylvanas felt her chest ache for his disappointment. No, they don't, she thought, illogically, but stubbornly. It is cruel of Mother to insist that Illyria remained here, she said. If there's trouble, a messenger could just as easily go to the haven and notify the Farstriders there. You know that is not the real reason, Lirath replied, and Sylvanas did. Illyria and her mother had been quarreling recently about Illyria's training. Larissa had ordered this to remind Illyria that the Ranger General was in charge, and Illyria must always obey. This was the third time Larissa had ordered her daughter to remain behind just in case. It was cruel and petty, and it also hurt Lirath, who hadn't deserved it. We love you, and we couldn't be prouder of you, Sylvanas said. I do know that, truly. I just... Well, Sylvanas hugged him tightly, then let him go, watching him run lightly toward the stables and his saddled hawkstrider. Her heart hardened. This wasn't right. Little Lord's son deserved better than this. An idea occurred to her, brash and dangerous, and she started to smile. All she needed to do now was convince Lady's son. Absolutely not, Illyria snapped moments later. One of these days your intrigues are going to get you into some real trouble. Now you sound just like father. They don't ever really hurt anyone. Illyria raised an eyebrow. That was one time, and no one is going to die from sugaring their meal instead of salting it. Over the last few years, Sylvanas entertained herself by sneaking into places she wasn't invited, and in a few instances even laying harmless traps for the unwary, claiming that she was practicing her hunting skills. Her father calmly pointed out that an enemy would not be defeated by having a bucket of icy water abruptly poured on them. It would certainly catch them off guard, Sylvanas had responded. Lirath had sighed. My darling girl, sometimes I fear the greatest threat to this nation is a clever idle mind. Sylvanas smiled at the memory, then continued. Sister, you know as well as I do that you won't be summoned. You will stay here and shoot arrows with Verisa until Mother returns home, just like always. Despite her practiced stoicism, Illyria winced. Now I'm the one being cruel, Sylvanas thought. She had a slight pang of regret, but the harsh words were necessary. I promise I won't get into trouble, she said. I never attend Southrill's stupid parties. No one there will recognize me. She hoped Illyria had forgotten that Lorthamar would be in attendance. I'll slip in, watch him play for a little while, then slip back out and come straight home. Verisa, their sweet little peacemaker, stepped between her older sisters and slipped her hands into theirs. All Lirath wants is someone in the audience who loves him, Verisa said earnestly. Wouldn't you want the same if you were performing in front of Prince Kael'thas? Illyria looked from her to Sylvanas, then sighed. Yes, I would. Very well, Lady Moon, you win. I will keep your secret. Just don't be so... She floundered for words. So you. Sylvanas snorted with laughter. She knew exactly what her sister meant, and that troubled her not at all. I will be the perfect lady, I promise. Now can you help me get into one of Mother's dresses? None of the Windrunner women cared much for dresses. People often told the sisters they were beautiful, and Sylvanas enjoyed the compliments, but in the end, flattery didn't mean much to any of them. Hardened leather armor that thwarted enemies was better than gleaming satin gowns, and well-crafted balanced arrows were their accessories of choice. Even so, there were social functions they were required to attend from time to time, given the importance of their parents' roles. Larissa had robes that were more opulent than anything Sylvanas would usually consent to wear, and Sylvanas wrinkled her nose in displeasure as she and Illyria struggled to fasten the inordinate number of buttons, hooks, and lacing. How does anyone wear these? She muttered. And why? Your feet are bigger than Mother's, Verisa observed. She sat on their parents' bed observing the unusual sight and chewing on her lower lip. Yes, but Mother's taller, which means the gown will hide my shoes, Sylvanas replied. Then the hem will get dirty. Sylvanas smiled. While the younger girl was obviously excited about the escapade, she was clearly also worried they'd get caught. I'll clean it, Sylvanas reassured her. She was anxious to get going. Who knew but Father's council session might end early, or Larissa return with more troll ears as trophies? Illyria started to braid her hair, but Sylvanas was done. This is good enough, she announced, grabbing a hat, clapping it atop her head, and stepping in front of the mirror to examine their handiwork. She almost didn't recognize herself. Her hair was usually a mess, and she often wore breeches and tunics that bore grass and other stains on them. The young woman in the mirror looked elegant and graceful, poised and sophisticated in the long green dress and the sweeping hat atop pale gold tresses. Sylvanas smiled and curtsied toward the reflection. It did the same. Her smile grew. Perfect. All right, so we get some continued humanizing of Sylvanas, which I think is just so important. It's pretty cool. I like this, and I think we're going to get to spend some time just without imminent tragedy. Like, there is imminent tragedy. It's part of who Sylvanas is. It's part of how you have such a kind of an... I don't even know if you can go so far as to call her an anti-hero. She's spent so long being basically a villain. But the best kind of villain. One that has their own rational justifications informed by a history that makes sense. And this is where we get to see that, which I think is cool. I also like this because this is unwritten history. So this is where Christy Golden gets to put her stamp again on the history of World of Warcraft. And she's drawing from other things that we've read, but a lot of it is her making it her own. And because of that, and she's done it so many times in many ways, she's as important as like Metzen and some of the other guys to the lore. I would argue. They're obviously they made it, but she's right up there. She's that next tier down. All right, cool. We got another episode in the pipe, 5x5, and I thank everybody so much for watching, for listening, and I look forward to seeing you all next time on Lore of Warcraft.